Photography 1-2, this is a portrait editing demo to edit and make our portraits a little nicer. So I grabbed a portrait here. I'm actually going to make a duplicate copy. I always recommend working on a copy so that way you can trash it if you mess up and start over and you always have the original to work with. So I'm just going to right click or press Control and click and select duplicate. Then I can right click or control click and choose the open in camera raw option. So first thing to consider, you could play with the color temperature. Sometimes the strobes will warm or cool up. So depending on how it's shot, you could manually change the white balance. So I'm just going to make this a little warmer and add a little magenta. That looks a little bit more neutral. You can obviously adjust the exposure. This is the highlight warning, so you can turn that off or on. And this is the shadow warning. So depending on how bright you want your photo, typically portraits you want them a little on the brighter side. And then for shadows, typically you want to see the person, right? So you don't want to see super dark shadows unless it's for artistic purpose. But for a nice portrait, I usually do lighten up shadows a little bit. So I might adjust this exposure depending on what it does to everything else. So just kind of lining up those shadows is a good thing to do. If I press Command plus, I can zoom in. And so I'm just going to show you with the texture slider. So I'm actually going to do a negative texture, and this is just to kind of soften the features on the skin. It makes it a little bit more flattering. And then you could do a slight negative clarity if you don't want to go too far. It looks like plastic. So I'm just going to do a little bit negative clarity too, and that just kind of evens out a lot of like skin complexion issues. Depending on the color of the skin, you could add some vibrancy saturation. This looks pretty good. What else I'm going to do is actually go into, I'm going to zoom out, press Command 0 to go back to the original view. And then I'm going to go to the Effects tab under Effects, and I'm going to add a vignette. So typically, when you add a vignette, it's to get to focus more on the face of the person. That's the point of the portrait. So you could adjust the midpoint in or out. You can also adjust the feather. So I usually do 100% feather, play with kind of the midpoint and the amount depending on how much I want to focus on the person, and kind of darken the edges around them so they stand out pretty well. One thing to consider is cropping. So you just want a decent bit of headroom, about mid-torso, and then them to be in the center of the frame. So if they're to the side, you could center them up a little bit like so. Basically, I'm just kind of lining up the eyes, in the center of this bracket here. Once it's good, just double click or hit return, and it'll crop the photo. Next, if you want to help your fellow student out, you could go to this spot removal brush tool. So I'm going to click on the spot removal tool, and I'm going to zoom in, so Command plus. You can also zoom in over here. We can change the view over here. And then if you hold the space bar, you can spacebar, hold it down and click and drag, and you can move around the photo, which is pretty useful, and then let go. So when you are using the brush, you do want to modify it so it's just a little bit bigger than what you're trying to remove. So I'm actually going to make it pretty small. And then I'm just going to grab a couple spots. So wherever you click, it'll show you kind of where it's healing from. So the red is what you're healing, and then the green is where it's healing from. Sometimes it will guess wrong because it is guessing, right? It's just it just sees pixels. So sometimes it will guess wrong, sometimes it will guess right. If it does guess wrong, what you can do is, let's see if I grab this right here. And so you can move where it's healing from and just kind of help it out further. So I'm just going to grab maybe some of these flyaway hairs. So right now it's doing a pretty good job. It does work better when you are closer to the subject. So this one added like a weird thing. So I'm just going to move it off here, and it should update it and get rid of that. There we go. So you can kind of adjust, where it's healing from. So I'm actually going to move this over here, and that'll help it out. So that is a benefit of this tool, is you can help it out. So I'm just going to grab a couple more of these real quick. Let's move this. There we go. And then move that up. There we go. So flyaways, imperfections. Those are kind of things you kind of want to take off, just to kind of make the person look a little nicer for their portrait. Again, we all, aren't 100% when we're getting our photo taken, but some days we do look a little better. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom back out. So just, try to clean it up, use the spotting line brush tool. It is pretty effective. Once you're happy with your portrait, you've gone through just the exposure, maybe adjusted the color temperature, lined up the shadows, adjusted the texture and the clarity, and then added a vignette. Then you just want to save all these settings onto the photo. Right now it's just previewing the settings, but it needs to be saved. So I'm just going to click open, and it's going to open the file into Photoshop. And then I'm just going to go File and Save. Because it's already a copy, I don't need to change the name. If it was something else, I would need to change the name. And so I'm just going to change the format. So I think it's actually adding a layer. Hold on, let me save as a JPEG. Let's do save as. Oh, that's weird. Oh, it's because it's 16-bit. So I had my settings for camera raw set to 16-bit. Yours should be on 8-bit, but mine is. So image mode, make sure it's set to 8-bit. And then I was just my camera raw settings. Yours should be 8-bit. And then save as. And then it should be JPEG. And then I'm just going to save it and replace it. And then I can adjust the quality and then hit OK. And so then in a couple steps, I went from here to here, adjusting the colors, the brightness, shadows, texture, clarity, vignette, cropping it a little bit, and then, doing some spot removal. So pretty good before and after. So thanks for watching. All right.